I was 29 years old, and my life looked steady from the outside. I had worked for years as a project consultant and finally bought my own home in Boston, a cedar shingle house with white trim and a small porch swing that creaked in the wind. It cost me $410,000, and though the mortgage payments sometimes felt like dragging a second anchor through life, I was proud to have my name alone on that deed. That little house represented everything I had built with my own effort. No family favors, no shortcuts, work, persistence, and years of saving. My fiancé, Evan Carter, spent half his time there and the other half in his apartment in the Back Bay. He worked, or so I thought, as a project manager for a big firm in New York City that specialized in major builds across America and Europe. His job, as he explained it, required frequent travel, site visits in London, Dublin, and sometimes Paris. He made it sound glamorous and stressful, but I didn't question it. He had a good salary, spoke confidently about deadlines, and brought back little gifts after each trip. A silk scarf, a bottle of French wine, a box of Belgian chocolates. Tokens that, at the time, I saw as proof of thoughtfulness. We got engaged the year before. The ring had cost $6,200, the receipt neatly folded in a small envelope he left on the counter for me to find. I told myself that the number meant he was serious, committed, invested. Commitment, in my eyes, was always measured not just in words but in sacrifices and choices. I believed we were building a future together. Then came the first nudge, small and almost forgettable. One Sunday, my cousin Sophie dropped by with iced coffee and gossip. With a skeptical grin, she showed me a photo on her phone. It was a group shot from a birthday party in New York. Everyone wore party hats, balloons in the background, and there was Evan in the middle, glass raised. The caption read, "Birthday dinner with the best crew." Sophie asked if I knew about it. I said yes. It must have been a client dinner. Evan had told me something about taking a client out for a birthday. When I confronted him that night, he laughed it off, said, "Exactly, babe. It was for work. Some clients prefer to mix social with business." Then he put his phone face down on the table, changed the subject, and later carried his tablet with him into the bathroom. A small detail, but once you start noticing secrecy, you can't unsee it. The small doubt turned into a scream of suspicion 2 weeks later. I had taken Evan's car to a wash near Fenway. When I bent to retrieve a quarter that had slipped under the seat, my hand closed around something else. A phone. Not his usual sleek iPhone, but a different one, cheaper, with a scuffed case. The lock screen lit up when I touched it. I froze. The wallpaper wasn't a cityscape or a sports logo. It was an ultrasound image. A baby. At the top of the screen was a notification from someone saved as L. My heart pounded so loud it felt like it rattled the windshield. I shoved the phone back under the seat, finished the wash on autopilot, and drove home with the radio cranked up just to drown out my thoughts. Back in my living room, I tried to breathe. I went to the guest room closet where Evan kept a carry-on bag for his trips. Something told me to check. Inside a side pocket, tucked between socks, were documents. I spread them across the floor. First, a statement from a British bank. Pounds, not dollars. Then, a flight receipt to Heathrow listing Mr. and Mrs. Carter. My chest tightened. Finally, a UK registry slip with the unmistakable stamp of a marriage record. The date was last year. My name was nowhere on it. I sat there on the rug, surrounded by evidence that my world wasn't what I thought it was. The air felt thin. I forced myself to act mechanically. Take photos, upload them to my email, back them up in my cloud folder. I told myself I would confront him, but the thought of saying words out loud made my throat lock. Days passed, and the clues only multiplied. Evan left for another New York overnight and forgot to log out of his iPad at my house. That morning, while drinking tea, I heard the ping of incoming messages. At first, I resisted. But when the second ping came, curiosity and fear overruled me. I opened the screen. The messages were intimate, warm, and devastating. Doctor says 7 months. Baby's heart strong. I'll file your coverage under spousal insurance in July. And then one that made me grip the table. My sister Elle is struggling again, but I'll fly back soon. I was L. In his story, I wasn't the fiancé. I was his unstable sister with episodes. My entire life with him had been rewritten into a lie he told another woman. That night, I went back to the second phone I had taken from his car and hidden in my coat. My hands trembled as I dialed the number saved as L. A woman answered in careful English, her voice soft but cautious. Hello. My name is... I paused, my throat tight. I'm Evan Carter's fiancé. Who are you? Silence, then. I'm his wife. Her accent carried a light European lilt. She said her name was Elena, that she lived in London. My knees buckled, and I sat down on the edge of the bed. We spoke for a long time, our voices quiet but sharp, cutting through each other's worlds. She was 7 months pregnant. She said Evan told her I was his younger sister, emotionally unstable and prone to fabricating stories. He had explained his trips to America as caretaking duties for me. I told her everything. The ring, the receipts, the British bank papers, the second phone. She listened in silence and finally asked me to send proof. I promised I would. After we hung up, I spent hours gathering everything. Screenshots of messages from the iPad. Bank statements from our joint account showing cash withdrawals during supposed business trips. Photos of the British documents. I compiled them into a folder on my laptop titled Truth 1. When I clicked send, attaching them to an email for Elena, I expected to feel broken. Instead, I felt something sharper, something like a switch flipping inside me. Not grief. Not rage. Something colder and steadier. Resolve. My life had just been split into 2 parts, before the second phone and after. Elena wrote back to me within an hour of my first email. Her words were brief, polite, and heavy with the kind of tension that only comes from a life suddenly turned upside down. Attached to her reply were scanned images, her marriage certificate bearing Evan's name, their lease in London with both signatures, and a short note from her brother, Marco. His tone was clipped and precise, each sentence like a legal brief. He wanted details. Dates. Flight numbers. Hotel confirmations. Anything that could show a timeline of where Evan had been when. I had plenty. Evan loved spreadsheets, and he had built one for our future. A shared calendar of his work trips, my project deadlines, and even reminders for anniversaries and bill payments. I exported the entire file, highlighted every trip he logged for New York or Chicago, and compared them against the ultrasound milestones Elena shared. The overlap was glaring. When he claimed to be in Chicago for a 4-day project, Elena had messages from him saying he was taking her to a prenatal checkup in London. The puzzle pieces clicked together in the ugliest way. Marco was efficient. Within hours, he sent back images from their side. A wedding photo taken outside a town hall in London, Evan in a navy suit with his arm draped proudly over Elena's shoulder. Bank transfers in pounds showing deposits from accounts I didn't recognize. A phone bill with calls to Evan's American number stretching across months. We decided to escalate. The 3 of us, me, Elena, and Marco, moved our coordination onto a video call. I remember sitting at my kitchen table in Boston, windows open to the humid summer air, laptop propped up on a stack of books. Elena appeared in a simple flat with whitewashed walls. She looked exhausted but steady, her belly unmistakably round under a loose sweater. She spoke softly, but her eyes never wavered. She told me she had already spoken to a solicitor in London. She intended to file bigamy charges. Her goal was not spectacle, it was protection. Safety for herself and for the child she carried. I promised her something in return. I said I would not confront Evan until we had a solid path, a plan that couldn't collapse if he tried to spin lies again. I told her I would take responsibility for my end here in America, that I would make sure his employer knew, and that I would gather every shred of proof needed. That path led to New York. Evan's mother, Patricia Carter, was not just a distant relative in his life. She was the vice president of people at Northbridge Projects, the firm Evan claimed as his employer. She oversaw human resources. I checked the company's website twice, just to be certain. Her name was right there, alongside a smiling headshot. I knew then that if Evan had bent rules, she had either enabled him or signed off blindly. Either way, the company would care, and I needed someone with power to hear the truth. I also knew I couldn't do this alone. So, I hired an attorney in Boston, Ruth Adler, recommended by a colleague who had survived a messy divorce. Ruth required a $7,500 retainer, which I wired to her account without hesitation. The moment I met her, I understood why she was worth it. Calm, deliberate, with a sharp intelligence that left no room for doubt. She listened as I poured out the evidence. When I finished, she folded her hands and said, "Companies don't ignore falsified travel. It's not just lies, it's fraud. Fraud sets fire to taxes, audits, and insurance. If we show them proof, they'll have no choice but to act." Ruth set to work drafting a short, professional memo. It wasn't emotional, it didn't need to be. It cited Evan's falsified travel receipts, the UK marriage record, the conflicting family status he had reported on HR forms, and the copies of his signed timesheets. Each piece of paper was a brick in a wall he could not climb. Then Ruth made the call to Northbridge's legal department. She requested a review meeting. She insisted Patricia Carter be present, since Patricia had approved multiple reimbursements. Ruth didn't accuse anyone directly. Her tone was measured, professional, almost sympathetic. She said the goal was to protect the company. Within an hour, the firm scheduled us for 2 days later in New York City. That night, I made my own quiet preparations. I booked an Amtrak ticket to Penn Station, $149. I transferred my entire emergency savings, $38,000, into a new account in my name only. I froze the joint credit card Evan and I shared, setting up alerts to ping my phone if he tried to use it. My financial lifeline was secure. He could not drag me under. The morning of the meeting, Ruth and I arrived at Northbridge's Midtown office, a sleek tower of glass and steel. We were escorted into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. The city hummed below us, indifferent to the storm about to unfold. First came Dana, the firm's legal officer, a woman with a steady gaze and a tablet in her hand. She was joined by an assistant carrying a neat stack of forms. Patricia walked in last. She looked at me the way one might look at a stray animal, half pity, half irritation. "What is this about?" she asked, smiling thinly. Ruth answered. She placed a binder on the table, divided by colored tabs. She spoke evenly, no emotion, no drama. She pointed out the discrepancies. The Chicago trip on his timesheet against a London passport stamp. The messages where Evan promised Elena's spousal insurance coverage while HR still listed him as single. The ring receipt is misaligned with both proposals. With each tab Ruth flipped, Patricia's smile faltered. Dana leaned forward, asking to bring in compliance. Within 20 minutes, 2 more staff members entered, badges clipped to their belts. They pulled up travel records and hotel invoices, matched them against corporate cards, and the patterns became impossible to ignore. Patricia tried once to interject, suggesting it was a misunderstanding, but Ruth cut her off politely. If there's a conflict of interest, perhaps Patricia should step out. Patricia rose stiffly and left the room. The rest of us remained. Dana read aloud from Evan's signed timesheets. The room grew quiet. Then Evan himself arrived, half an hour late, red-faced and visibly rattled. He froze when he saw me, then the binder. "What is this?" he stammered, saying my name like a question. Dana calmly asked him to sit. She asked about his last 3 trips. He answered too smoothly enough, but when pressed on the third, he stumbled. He contradicted his own earlier story. His eyes darted from Ruth to me to Dana. The silence in the room pressed down like a weight. Finally, Dana closed her tablet and said one sentence. "Evan Carter, you are suspended pending investigation." The meeting ended abruptly. Ruth gathered the binder. I stood, my legs steady though my heart hammered. I did not look at him as we left. That night, I boarded the late train back to Boston. The window showed dark fields rushing past, and for the first time in weeks, I felt not despair but something like strength. When the train pulled into Back Bay, my phone buzzed. It was Elena. Her message was short. My solicitor filed today. The hospital file now blocks his access. Thank you for facts, not noise. I stood there on the platform with my small suitcase and nodded to no one, the cool night air on my face. Something had shifted. For the first time since finding that second phone, I felt the balance tip toward truth. The week after the meeting in New York unraveled into chaos. It began with text messages, a handful at first, then dozens. Evan started with jokes, as if mocking the entire situation would erase it. You're overreacting. You always had trust issues. This will blow over. When I didn't respond, his tone shifted. He wrote long apologies filled with excuses, blaming stress, travel, and even me. Then came anger. You ruined my career. You'll regret this. You think you're smarter than me? He left voicemails, each one louder than the last. One promised he would pay me $50,000 if I deleted everything, and walked away. Another accused me of fabricating documents, insisting I wasn't thinking clearly. His desperation leaked through every word. By the third day, he escalated to pounding on my front door at midnight. My neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, an older widow who lived 2 houses down, called the police when she saw him shouting in the street. The officers arrived, lights flashing, and took a report. They told me bluntly, if he comes back, file for a restraining order. He did come back. Twice. That was enough. The next morning, I went to the Suffolk County Courthouse. The building smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant, and my legs shook as I climbed the marble steps. The clerk at the counter handed me a stack of forms. My hands trembled as I filled in each blank. Name, address, relationship, description of harassment. Ruth met me there, steady as always, guiding me through every line. When I finally stood before the judge, I felt both exposed and determined. I spoke quietly but firmly. The judge granted a temporary order of protection. It barred Evan from contacting me in any form and prohibited him from coming within 100 yards of me or my home. The order was a single sheet of paper, thin and fragile, but when I held it, it felt like armor. Meanwhile, Northbridge wasted no time. 3 days after the meeting, Ruth received a call from Dana, the legal officer. The company had completed a preliminary review. Their findings were clear. Evan had falsified travel reports, misused a corporate card for personal expenses, and lied on benefits paperwork. The words "terminated with cause" hung in the air like a final verdict. Patricia, his mother, didn't return to any legal meetings after that. I later heard whispers she had quietly taken a leave of absence, perhaps out of shame, perhaps to salvage her own reputation. But Evan wasn't done. He tried a different tactic. One evening, I came home to find a small business card slid under my door. It bore the name of a man I didn't know with a phone number and the words "Consultant, Dispute Resolution." Scribbled in pen on the back were the words, representing Evan. "We can close this matter for a fair sum." My stomach turned. I took a photo of the card and sent it to Ruth. Within an hour, she had called the number. Her voice must have been as sharp on the phone as it was in person, because the man never contacted me again. I decided I couldn't live in that house, not then. Every creak of the floorboards at night made me jump. Every knock on the door froze my blood. I packed a suitcase and rented a small one-bedroom in Portland, Maine, for a month. It cost me $2,400, but peace of mind was worth more than any mortgage payment. I changed the locks on my Boston house before I left, spending $310 for new deadbolts and keys. I installed a security camera system I bought online for $129. The blinking red light above the door was a small comfort. I also took back control of every tether he might still have. I called the utility companies tied to his Back Bay apartment and removed my name from joint accounts. I ran my credit report line by line, terrified of what I might find: loans, cards, debts I didn't know existed. To my relief, it was clean. For once, luck had sided with me. Elena stayed in touch through short notes. She and Marco met with their local authority to confirm the marriage record and file a formal bigamy complaint. She told me her doctor had set her due date for early summer. Her words carried a strange calmness, even as her life was fractured. She asked me to block Evan's number completely and reminded me to keep my heart calm. One night, she mentioned that the baby kicked whenever she listened to piano music. I made her a playlist of classical pieces and sent her a photo of the pond outside my temporary rental. It was my way of telling her she wasn't alone. But Evan's attempts didn't stop. The offers of money shifted into threats. In one voicemail, he claimed he would release emails that painted me as mentally unstable. In another, he warned that no one would believe my side. Each message I forwarded to Ruth. She compiled them, timestamped, and filed them with the court. At the next hearing, the judge reviewed them, nodded grimly, and extended the protective order. What had been a temporary shield became something stronger, something with real weight. Harassment was now documented. Threats were recorded. Each piece tightened the net around him. One afternoon, I took off the engagement ring. It glittered in the light, but felt heavy on my finger, like a chain. I brought it to a jeweler in Boston who examined it under a magnifying glass. He offered me $3,300, half of what Evan had paid. I accepted without hesitation. The money went straight toward legal bills, and 2 months of my mortgage before a refinance saved me another $480. Selling the ring wasn't just about money. It was a final severing, a symbol turned back into a stone, and a check. I also closed the last joint account we had together, one holding $2,600. The bank clerk, a young man with kind eyes, asked if I was sure. I smiled faintly and said yes. He didn't know the weight behind that answer. By late summer, Elena gave birth. Marco sent me a brief message. Mother and baby are well. The hospital has notes to block Evan. Please take care. I read it alone in my kitchen, clutching the phone, and tears filled my eyes. Not because I was sad, but because something had ended. Something had been resolved, if only partially. I cried into a dish towel, letting out months of tension I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Evan's voice still echoed in my head some nights, but it grew fainter with time. The threats, the chaos, the lies. They no longer dictated my every breath. I began to see that the protective order wasn't just a court document. It was permission, finally, to breathe again. When autumn arrived in Boston, I finally returned to my house. The air was crisp, and the maples on my street had turned red and gold. I remember standing at the bottom of the porch steps, staring at the front door that had once felt like the threshold to a life with Evan. For a moment, I almost turned away. But then I took a deep breath, dug my key into the lock, and stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of dust and wood polish, but beneath it was something else. Silence. Clean, steady silence that belonged only to me. The first thing I did was paint the front door. I chose a deep, bold blue from a hardware store in Cambridge. The color felt strong, like a line drawn between past and present. For 2 days, I worked with a brush and roller, the scent of fresh paint sharp in the cool air. Neighbors passed and waved. A few asked if I was finally settling in. I smiled and said yes. In truth, I wasn't just settling in, I was reclaiming my space. Inside, I stripped away reminders of him. The large gray couch he loved was sold for $600 to a student who hauled it away in a rented truck. In its place, I bought a smaller, cream-colored love seat that fit perfectly under the window. I rearranged the furniture, hung new curtains, and donated the mugs and plates he had picked out. Each change, however small, rewrote the house in my handwriting. Work became my anchor. I accepted a job with a construction nonprofit in Cambridge, earning $84,000 a year. The work was practical, hands-on, and meaningful. I visited sites where new homes were built for families who had lost everything. I carried clipboards, checked progress, and learned to see a house not just as wood and nails, but as a promise of stability. Standing in the dust of those sites reminded me that structures can collapse, and they can be rebuilt stronger. On weekends, I let myself wander. Sometimes I took the train to Providence just to walk by the river and study the historic houses with their peeling paint and stubborn grace. Other times I stayed in Boston, sipping coffee with friends at corner cafes, learning to fill my days with voices that cared. I made a quiet plan. to pay down my mortgage by an extra $250 a month. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Progress is measured in steady steps. I learned, too, how to sleep again. At first, nights were restless. I would jolt awake at every creak, my body braced for his knock on the door. But slowly, as days passed without incident, my breathing steadied. I kept no devices in the bedroom, no screens, no reminders. I promised myself never again to input passwords into any account or tablet that wasn't solely mine. That rule, simple as it was, felt like a safeguard around my life. News of Evan reached me like weather from a faraway town, unavoidable but irrelevant. A former coworker sent me a link to a New Jersey court site. Evan had been charged with a DUI on a desolate stretch of highway. The mugshot showed his face pale, his eyes empty. Later, another acquaintance told me he was living out of a car behind a gym, showering with a day pass. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't even feel pity. I felt distance. Choices, I realized, always have roots. He had watered his, and they had grown into this. Months later, Elena reached out once more. Her message was short and steady. The bigamy case was active. She wouldn't share details, and I respected that. She thanked me for the documents I had provided and for keeping quiet in public. She wrote that her baby was healthy, sleeping through the night, soothed by the sound of rain. She said she had blocked all contact from Evan and felt safe. I replied simply that I was glad. We didn't try to force a friendship out of our shared wound. We had been allies in survival, nothing more. We wished each other health and peace, and we signed off. Spring arrived the following year, soft and generous. On the first truly warm day, I held a yard sale. I dragged old lamps, a desk with chipped corners, and a mismatched box of glasses onto the lawn. Neighbors strolled by, picking through the remnants. A woman named Grace bought a stack of plates and told me my freshly painted blue door made the block look brighter. I smiled, and for the first time in a long while, I believed her. That evening, I sat on the porch steps as the sun dipped low, turning the maples gold. The house behind me was no longer a shadow of what I had lost. It was a promise I had kept to myself, to survive, to rebuild, to stand. I listened to the quiet street and felt a peace I hadn't thought possible. Sometimes I reflect on the beginning of it all, on the moment the story cracked open. It wasn't the second phone, or the British bank documents, or even the messages on his tablet. It was the way he put his devices face down and called my questions burdens. That small gesture was the real clue. Now I know love doesn't hide behind secrecy or turn transparency into suspicion. Real love puts the screen face up, unafraid of the light. I keep my proof folder still, locked in a password vault that costs me $59 a year. It isn't out of fear anymore. It's out of memory, a record of what I survived. My heart I keep elsewhere, in the circle of people who answer when I call, who know me as I am and not as a story invented to cover someone else's lies. Life now is simple. I pay my bills. I walk by the Charles River and watch the rowers cut through the water. I meet friends for brunch, laugh at small things, and let rain tap gently on my roof without mistaking it for footsteps at the door. If this story has a moral, it is not complicated. When the truth knocks, open the door. Do not pretend it isn't there. Do not cover it with excuses. Open it wide, face it, and then lock the right one behind you as you step forward. That is how survival becomes strength. That is how ruins become homes again.